Welcome, my dear adventurer. It's Yisselda. You've found the Cosy Chocobo, a place for quiet stories, gentle dreams, and a little escape from the waking world. So settle in, get comfortable, and let the journey begin. Tonight, we go to the land of Valisthea, a realm blessed by the light of the Mothercrystals that rise above the land like ancient sentinels and bestowing ether and magic to its people. From the wind-swept plateaus of the Dalmatian Republic, the veiled peaks of the Iron Kingdom, to the dense, verdant forests of the Holy Empire, Valisthea is a world steeped in beauty and shadow alike. For the blight creeps ever so slowly, draining the land of all life form, as the kingdoms and their icons spiral deeper into war. Having started a fourth fresh playthrough of Final Fantasy XVI, I was inspired to write this story. Although the game has been divisive among fans, it has become one of my top Final Fantasies of all time. But just a gentle warning, if you haven't played the game and plan to, this tale may contain some spoilers from a certain turning point in the story. Tonight, we walk in the footsteps of Jote, Knight of the Undying and sworn protector of the Phoenix, loyal attendant and companion to the one long believed to have perished during the Night of Flames. If you enjoy this video, please don't forget to like, comment and subscribe. Your support means so much as I continue to grow my little corner of dreams. So now, find a cozy spot, let the firelight embrace you like the gentle, smouldering wings of the phoenix. Let the weight of the day slip from your shoulders, and your breath slow. Allow your mind to drift as you walk beside two souls bound by duty, across a fading world where a single flame still burns in the dark. I was 7 when they brought him to us. I remember the storm that night, not one of thunder, but of fire. The sky had turned red over Phoenix Gate, and we watched from the high windows as an enormous column of fire flashed upon the earth and reached up toward the heavens. The ground shook as if Titan himself would rise from it and destroy everything in its wake. And after the flame had settled and the wind had stilled, there was nothing left but a crater. They said he had died, and yet he breathed. Joshua Rosfield, dominant of the Phoenix, second son of the Archduke, small, pale, barely alive as they carried his bloodied and broken body wrapped in singed cloth. They called for my mother, our best physiker. I had watched from the shadows as they hurried him away to the infirmary. And following the days of the collapse of Rosaria, as the Undying swiftly relocated from our long-settled home in Rosalith to Tabor, I watched and did as I was told. Even at 7, that was my duty. They told me I would serve him, not as a knight, not yet, but as his attendant. Someone quiet, someone invisible, who knew how to remain in the shadows. Someone who would also fetch water, grind salves, and listen without speaking. I said yes, of course. That was how I was raised. Daughter of Cyril, bearer of the burning quill, and leader of the Undying. My mother, Margot, lead physica of the Undying. I, Jote, conceived and born just after the birth of the second son of the Archduke, to fulfill a duty. The duty to protect the bloodline of the Phoenix, first and foremost. Among the Undying, their names bore weight that settled around my shoulders like a cloak of heavy mail. But I wore it like a sheath I couldn't yet draw, for that, too, was my duty. Weeks passed after our resettlement in Tabor, in our small hideaway in the dusty village. He didn't speak much at first, Joshua. He barely looked at me, but when he did have the energy, he read, even in sickness, even in silence. He would sit amongst the bookshelves for hours, his small thin fingers turning pages with reverence, the candlelight soft on his face. He read as though there might be some truth hidden between the lines of each written page, as though the world might have left an apology folded inside the margins of some forgotten book. Or perhaps an explanation, a reason why magic exists, why dominance exists, and why the blight was slowly creeping across the land of Valisthea, erasing all life in its wake. In between attending to him, I trained hand-to-hand combat, sword forms, quiet steps, observation. Occasionally, if he was feeling well, he would watch or join me, for even the Phoenix should learn how to defend himself if need be. We spoke very little unless he needed something. Despite his somber, withdrawn manner, he was always polite, but I learned his rhythms, when to bring him water, when to leave him be, when to rest a hand on his shoulder just for a moment, when the nightmares left him shaking and coughing up blood in the dark hours of the night. Years passed like this, quietly, steadily, like a stone smoothing under water. I grew taller. He grew stronger, but his body would still occasionally fail him. His fever would rise and wane, and his cough would leave him gasping for air while I rushed for one of his many tonics or salves which Mother had taught me to prepare. He would recover, and in the days after, would be well enough to join me in training, sparring with a fevered energy until he would almost collapse in exhaustion, and then his cough would return, and I would tell him yet again to save his strength and not to exhaust himself so. This day was a late summer evening, the sky outside turning the colour of gold and rose and purple in the distant horizon. I had finished drills and was sitting beneath the arch near the western stair, unstrapping my greaves. He had just broken through yet another one of his fevers, and it seemed he had taken my word to heart that day when, instead of joining me in drills, he headed to the shelves, his safe haven of tomes and pages and words. That's when I heard them call for him. I knew something was amiss when Father and the others returned that evening from their rendezvous in Sanbreque. Father and his second-in-command, Theron, moved like men bearing grave news, speaking amongst each other in hushed, urgent whispers. I watched as they passed through to the main hall, cloaks dusted with ash from the southern winds. Father did not glance towards me, but with a slight nod of his head, I felt him acknowledge my presence. Joshua followed Cyril and the others into the hall where the Undying gathered in times of uncertain news. A narrow room lined with sealed scrolls, its high window cracked open just enough to let the wind whistle through. I stood afar, hidden in shadow. He stood across from my father, the firelight casting his silhouette against the stone. We continue to track your brother, as we have done since the incident at Phoenix Gate, Cyril said, never one to waste time with pleasantries. Branded and in imperial service, the bastards to be exact. He answers to the name of Wyvern. Joshua's hands were clasped at his back, his demeanour calm. And you still believe him a threat? He is bound to the Empire for now, Cyril replied. But he fights with the blessing of the Phoenix and an affinity for fire beyond any bearer's reach. That is obvious. The anomaly, this second icon of fire, still slumbers within him. Joshua's jaw tensed. He did not ask for that power. That changes nothing, Cyril replied sharply. Two dominants of fire upset the balance of the world, of what we have always known to be true as the Undying, for centuries as the protectors of the Phoenix and the ducal throne. Whatever granted him that strength, it comes at a cost. And whatever the Empire plans to do with him when they discover his power, with both Bahamut and Ifrit in their remit, we cannot allow it to grow unchecked. My father stepped forward, his voice even. The offer still stands. We have our assassins at the ready. If you give the word, we can end it cleanly. Joshua's silence lingered. No. Your Grace. He remains my brother, Joshua said, and until I understand what truly happened at Phoenix Gate, we do not move against him. There was a long pause between them. As you wish, Your Grace, Cyril said finally, his words heavy. What other news? Joshua asked. There is unrest across the sea, Cyril replied. The Ironblood have the dominant of Shiva. From whence she came, we do not know. Theron stepped forth. The Dalmekians are mobilizing. If they act, Waloed will respond. And should that happen, Valisthea may well fall into a full war of icons. Then we must move quickly, Joshua stepped back, folding his arms. Toward what end? Cyril questioned. This will not just be a war of icons or territories. There is something we're missing here. It is beyond that. If my research is to be believed, there is a connection between the Mothercrystals, the Blight, and the increasing unrest we are witnessing. Speaking of which, Your Grace, Cyril pulled a book from the pile of worn ancient tomes that had been sitting on the table. New tomes from their recent sojourn in Sanbreque. This will complement your research well, I believe, Cyril said. Bound in weathered leather and sealed with a wax crest, long cracked. The Journal of Moss the Chronicler. Later that evening, I found him in the library. The hour was late, and the winds had shifted. No longer whistling, but breathing slow and deep through the stone houses and dusty streets of Tabor, like a beast slumbering beneath the town. Joshua sat on the floor at the foot of the shelves, bathed in candlelight, books spread in a constellation around him as he took notes in his own journal. "You're still awake," he said as I entered. "I might say the same, Your Grace," I replied, kneeling beside him. The candlelight glowed softly against his tired face, framed by his golden hair that curled at the ends. He gestured to the book in his lap, the journal of Moss the chronicler, and opened it to a page marked by a torn ribbon of red cloth. The script was dense and slanted, but clear. Beside it, a strange inked circle of robed figures, hands raised toward a tree with curled branches like dying flames. The Circle of Malleus, Joshua murmured. A forgotten cult, supposedly died out centuries ago, or so I thought, but Moss, he wrote of them in detail. Their rites, their visions. They believed in a supreme deity, not just a concept or a myth, but a being that predates the crystals, the icons, perhaps even the fallen, even Valisthea itself. I leaned closer, my eyes catching a name scrawled in the margin. Ultima, I whispered. He flipped the page, revealing a hand-drawn map. It was misshapen, drawn from memory perhaps, but still recognizable with the Mothercrystals drawn where they are today. Moss wrote that the circle sought commune with Ultima, Joshua continued. That they believed the blight was not a sickness but a return, a cleansing of what they called the false age of gods. False age of gods as in the dominance, I asked. Joshua turned to his notebook, reading aloud what he had transcribed so far from Moss's journal. The icons are his subordinates to serve, to act as temporary vessels for a perfect will. Flesh must be refined until only truth remains. He looked up. They believed the Mothercrystals were the keys, Jote, that each one is part of some larger design, a ritual perhaps. Are they perhaps the force that is driving the blight into our lands at Ultima's will, if he does indeed exist? I don't know, he admitted, but perhaps we've been looking at it the wrong way. It's not just spreading randomly, it's chasing something, or someone, and the way the world is reacting, the kingdoms, the wars, the dominance. It all feels orchestrated. What do you intend to do, Your Grace? I asked. Do you mean to follow this? Joshua folded his notebook shut and stared into the fire. If there's a chance they're connected, he spoke softly, almost as if he was speaking to himself. I have to find out. What happened that night? It wasn't just a tragedy, it was part of something larger. My stomach clenched. Your Grace, to leave the safety of these walls, the protection of the Undying, we cannot risk it. He didn't speak, but simply regarded me at length with a look I recognized, of decision and fierce determination. You've already decided, I noted. It was not a question. I can't stay here forever. I have to know. Then I will go with you. He turned to me, his eyes clear and not glazed with fever or sickness. For the first time in a long time, I saw the boy who had once been carried through these halls on the brink of death. But he wasn't broken, not anymore. He was ready, and so quietly, as the dust settled from yet another storm that had passed through Tabor, we began to prepare, to leave, to follow a trail of forgotten names and chase the truth of a god hidden in shadows and time. Word soon spread of our plans. It was the eve of our departure when Cyril summoned him again. I watched from the shadow just beyond the archway, unseen. My father had always known when I was nearby, but he didn't look toward the shadows, not this time. The room was cold, not by temperature, but by Father's reserved and serious nature. The walls were bare but for a single tapestry, newly acquired it seemed, torn in half, depicting the icons, and above them, another creature altogether that I did not recognize. My father stood with his hands folded behind his back, shoulders square beneath his cloak. Joshua, as always, stood with grace. The silence was heavy before Cyril spoke. Your Grace, I request you reconsider your decision regarding the matter of your brother. I saw Joshua's spine straighten, not sharply, but in a way only someone who had watched him for years would recognize. Still, he said nothing. Cyril stepped forward. There cannot be two. Joshua spoke, his voice quiet. He would not have chosen this. Another silence passed between them. I could see the tension in Joshua's shoulders, his fists clasped tight. The candlelight trembled against the wooden walls of our sanctum. Then Cyril's voice grew colder. The anomaly must be removed. We have the means. If you leave these halls, you will no longer be under our protection. If you wish to chase myths and rootless gods, we will not stop you. But we will eliminate the one thing that threatens the life of the Phoenix. You mean Clive, my own flesh and blood? I mean the flaw that decimated the gate and nearly brought an end to the Phoenix. I had never seen Joshua angry before. Not truly. But there was something in his eyes, a resolve that welled from deep within him. His voice was soft, almost trembling with controlled fury. You do not understand. None of this started with Clive. He did not cause it. He's part of it, as am I. But he is not the source. My father's expression didn't change. He wasn't cruel. He was never cruel. He was fixed on his duty. I had seen it before, the face of an Undying who had decided what must be done. Joshua took a step forward. I will not let you touch him. Cyril's eyes narrowed. You would risk your life and the world for your brother. I would risk it for the truth. Then what do you intend? Joshua glanced towards the shadow where I stood. We will find the truth, he said. We will follow the trail of Ultima, of the Mothercrystals and the Dominance. Learn why and how we fit into it. If this being truly does exist, if it was believed that he would one day return to subordinate the world to his will by manipulating the Dominance, we need to know. And if Clive is part of that design? Cyril questioned in a cautious tone. Joshua's voice was steady. Then I will face him, not like this. Cyril was silent for a long moment. If that is your wish, your grace. Father glanced toward the shadow where I stood this time. We will have your attendant and Knight of Undying accompany you. He turned his back to Joshua, looking up at the tapestry of the icons. With a heavy breath, Joshua left the chamber without a sound. I took a step from the shadows to follow when my father spoke, stopping me in my tracks. Jote. I turned around, hesitating before stepping closer. The candlelight bounced off the walls, lighting the tired edges of his eyes and frown lines on his face. He paused, as if waiting for Joshua to gain some distance between us before finally speaking again. You followed him. I always do, I replied. Father. My father stood before the tapestry, still, shoulders broad beneath his cloak, his spine as straight as ever. His hands were clasped behind his back, unmoving. We had always spoken like this, with reservation, with stillness. Words only came if they were earned. He is not weak, Cyril said, but he is young. He carries a burden he does not yet fully understand. And you think killing his brother will lighten it? Killing his brother will protect him. We cannot have a repeat of Phoenix Gate. The line must survive. That is our purpose. I took a step forward. My boots didn't echo. I had learned to move in silence in the years since he last trained me. You trained me to act in silence and shadow, to strike only when I understood the shape of the threat. And this isn't a threat, he asked, finally turning to face me. His eyes were sharp, purposeful and sure. Two flames, one boy shattered, another lost, uncontrolled. It is a threat, Jote, you know that. I met his gaze. Then let me understand it first. There won't be time. We will make time. His jaw clenched, just once. A flicker of something beneath the stoicism glanced across his face as his posture slackened, and he stepped toward me, his expression now softened. For a moment he looked down at me as he did when I was a child, just as when he had placed a wooden sword in my hand and told me never to swing it in anger, only truth. Now he said nothing. He placed his hand lightly on my shoulder. You know your duty, he murmured. Do not forget it. I won't. Then go. I nodded once, and he turned away. That was all. We were undying. We did not say goodbye. We left just before dawn as the sun broke through the horizon in the east. It was an unusually chilly morning, the cold air shifting around us as we disappeared through the town gate. We had packed lightly, a small amount of gill, my tools, tonics and salves, his notebooks, and a few days' worth of supplies before we reached the next town, Lostwing. I drew my cloak tightly around me as we started north, lifting my hood and placing it over my head to shield my ears from the bitter wind and dust. I looked over to Joshua as he did the same. We exchanged a look of silent understanding of the task and the journey that lay ahead of us. We continued on beneath a grey sky, our footsteps perforating the sounds of the winds through the trees and grasses and birds whistling as the sun rose at midday. For a long time we did not speak, but just as the last hills of Tabor vanished in the distance, he broke the silence. I won't lose him again, he said. But I won't let him lose himself either. Not to this, not if I can understand it first. Then we will understand it together. He looked at me. You are certain? It is my duty, Your Grace. There was a pause. I must have a different name. It won't do for others to know that the dominant of the Phoenix, and thus the ghost of Joshua Rosfield, continues to walk amongst the living. Of course, I hesitated. Lord Margrace. Joshua chuckled. That'll do. We walked on. The road bent downward into a meadow divided into a stream. Smoke curled from a distant village chimney. Somewhere far beyond, a storm brewed. But for now, the air was clear, and I could see the fire in him burning steadily. We walked for 3 days, resting only a few hours in the night, just enough to keep our strength. It would only be one more day before we reached Lostwing, a place where we might rest, recoup, and continue westward into Rosaria and to the ruins of Phoenix Gate. Our supplies were nearly gone. No more bread, no more dried meats or fruits, barely enough salve and tonic to treat even the smallest wound, and I had hardly spotted any useful herbs along our path. I could feel the weight of fatigue in my limbs and a dull ache in the joints. But Joshua, he was fading faster. He didn't complain, he never did. But as we reached the crest of a hill past midday on the 3rd day, he slowed, pressing his hand to his chest, and began to cough. That old, cruel cough that hollowed his lungs and left his face pale and drawn. I pulled his arm over my shoulder and allowed him to lean his weight against me as we moved off the road. "Sit," I ordered before he could protest. He obeyed, breath shallow, fingers trembling slightly as he reached for the flask at his hip. I knelt beside him, pressing my hand to his back, waiting for the spasm to pass. It was all I could do. The last of the tonic was gone. After a few moments he quietened and exhaled slowly. "I'm fine," he whispered. He was not. The road stretched northward through thinning hills. Lostwing was still a day away, and with his strength waning and our water nearly spent, we needed shelter, not as a convenience, but as a necessity. That's when we saw it. A small farm tucked against the foot of a hill, its roof weathered and low. Smoke rose from a crooked chimney. 2 goats wandered aimlessly behind a low stone wall, and beyond the gate, the soft clang of tools and the quiet drone of a song hummed through the air. Joshua looked at me. I gave the smallest nod, which he returned. We would rest here. The couple who greeted us were older. The man with a crooked leg leaning on a cane and a tuneless whistle in his breath. The woman with grey hair wound into a simple braid and eyes sharp with knowing. Joshua introduced himself as Lord Margrace, and I, his companion. "Red sea folk travelling north," the man muttered, leaning on his cane. "Most folk head east these days, away from the Blight and Lostwing." "Why is that?" Joshua asked, his voice hoarse. The woman's gaze lingered on him a moment, then shifted to the horizon. "Waludans have taken a liking to it. Word is they're collecting bearers, all of them, bringing them back across the water for the king, they say. But if you're not a bearer, you won't have any problem now, would you?" Joshua turned his head, his eyes meeting mine in a knowing glance. A new trail. They offered us small portions of thin stew and bread by their hearth before leading us to the barn where mats had been laid out. We took them, weary with exhaustion. As Joshua slept, I stepped outside. I had glanced something green as the man led us through the field. The sky was veiled in pale indigo, and in the quiet moonlight beside the barn, there it was, amongst the overgrown moss and bramble, something I hadn't seen in days. Cindermint. It grew wild here, its leaves slightly curled, edges tinged with silver. Nearby, sprigs of ghost leaf and ligustrum curled from the soil like sleeping snakes. I crouched low, brushing the dirt from the stalks. These were not rare herbs, common enough, but in the right hands they could become something precious. A tonic to ease breath, a balm to quiet fever. I gathered what I could, tying the bundles with twine from my satchel. But to make them useful, I would need flame. Back at the barn, I laid out my tools beside a flat stone. A small mortar, a shallow dish, a flask of bitterroot essence, useless on its own, but invaluable as a mixing agent. I crushed the herbs slowly, methodically, the rhythm of it grounding and familiar. After a while, Joshua stirred and came to sit beside me, his posture bent with weariness. I didn't look up. "You're awake?" "I have slept enough," he murmured. "Is that?" "Cindermint and ghost leaf," I responded. "If I heat it just enough for the oils to come, I can make something that will settle your lungs, maybe keep the fever off." He was silent a moment. "Do you need fire?" I hesitated, knowing it was much to ask of him. "Yes." He didn't ask again. He raised his palm, and a soft flame bloomed in his hands. Not fierce nor bright, just enough to heat it. He held it steady as I warmed the dish, stirring slowly, letting the herbs melt and the oil seep out until its scent rose in soft spirals of mint and myrrh. "Thank you, Your Grace," I said. "Only for a moment," he replied. He closed his fist, and the fire vanished as I mixed the crushed herbs and bitterroot essence together. I poured the finished tonic into empty glass vials and sealed them, giving the last portion for him to drink before he closed his eyes and fell again into a slumber. The warmth and the herbal scent lingered in the barn. Outside, the wind had calmed. For the remaining night, it was peaceful. I awoke just before dawn as a strange stillness settled around the barn. There was no sound, not a whisper. The goats stood silent in their pen. No bird stirred among the trees. Even the dust outside on the road seemed to hold its breath. Something was amiss. Silently, I stood from my mat and stepped to the barn door, peering through the crack of the opening. They had come. Cloaked in grey, shrouded in steel mail and blood-stained swords at their side. Waloed intelligences, 4, maybe 5 men at most. And behind them, at the open gate, leaning casually on his cane, stood the old farmer. His eyes never lifted. He didn't need to look. I turned. Joshua was already awake, sitting on the edge of the mat. "Your Grace, we have company." He didn't flinch, didn't even look toward the door. "Good," he replied softly. "We may learn more from the Waluders. Let's not resist. At the very least, we will perhaps be able to rescue any captured bearers." Hurriedly, we pulled on our cloaks and hoods, securing our satchels underneath just in time before the barn doors burst open with sudden violence. No knock, no warning. Just a splintering crash of old wood and dust. They swept into the darkness, blades drawn, cloaks billowing in the lantern light. The first instinct clawed its way up through me like flame through dry glass. My fingers found the hilt of my dagger before my mind caught up. I held it, not to draw, but to remember what it meant to let go. No, there must be no resistance. Still, the old training surged through my limbs. The calculation of reach, footing, angles of escape. I could feel my heartbeat shift into rhythm. The count of steps, the distance to the door, the speed of a lunge. But I didn't move. One of the intelligences stepped forward, the largest of the group, his voice low and impersonal. "These are the fire bearers." Behind him, the old man's voice sounded, gravelly and rough. "Without doubt." Their gazes settled toward us. "On the ground, now," the leader growled. Joshua knelt, his breath steady. For a fleeting moment, I was glad that the tonic I had prepared the previous night was working. I followed him, my knees finding the ground. But every movement felt like betrayal, not of him, but of the blood in my veins, of the long hours training in silence, the mantra etched into me since childhood. Protect the phoenix, defend the line, fight in shadow, strike in silence. And yet I did none of it, because this too was a service, not with blade, but with restraint. "Bind them," the order came. As the rope slid around my wrists, I clenched my jaw to keep my muscles still. We stepped out into the brittle light of the morning. The old man stood at the gate, watching, his leathery face wearing a grim expression, thin lips pursed in a frown. He didn't meet our eyes as we were led away. The path rose through thickets of ash and pine, winding beneath a canopy that dulled the light and thickened the air. The Waludas said nothing. They moved like wolves, quiet, precise, their boots pressing the forest floor with a hush of damp leaves and broken twigs. Joshua walked beside me, steady in his silence. There was no tension in his jaw, no resistance in his step. His hood shadowed his brow, but the dawn had painted his cheeks pale. Then the keep rose through the mist. Caer Norvund. Its towers jutted from the hillside like broken fingers clawing at the sky amongst the hills of evergreen. They didn't take us through the front, not through the high gates where banners once flew. Instead, they led us along a side path, narrow and moss-slicked, past half-crumbling barracks where no fire burned. We entered through rusted iron doors and passed into the stone belly of the keep. The air changed as we descended. The walls wept with moisture, and the torches flickered low, casting more shadow than light. The deeper we went, the quieter it became, the air filling with a tense unease, pierced only by our footsteps. Then came the cells. Iron bars lined both walls. At first I thought them empty, until I heard the cough. Dry, cracked, then another, fainter. Whispers and whimpers echoed through the dark. A boy, no older than I had been when I first arrived in Tabor, sat curled against the far wall. His knees were drawn to his chest, his gaze turned inward. The one beside him stared blankly ahead, lips moving in a whisper I could not hear. All of them wore the brand. Bearers, men and women, from children to the elderly, waiting to be shipped across the sea to become slaves to the kingdom of Walud. We passed through another stone corridor, reaching the end before one of the guards kicked open a cell door. Its iron screeched on rusted hinges. A hand was placed on my shoulder, and we were shoved inside without ceremony. Then the door slammed shut behind us, leaving nothing but dim torchlight that glanced against the cold stone walls. The silence of the cell pressed down like a weight that hung heavy around our shoulders. Joshua sat across from me on a single crate, his head bowed, hands still tied behind his back. The lanterns outside the door burnt low, spilling long shadows across the floor. I sat on the ground at Joshua's side, the cold stone floor pressing against me. Neither of us spoke for a long time. It had been hours since they'd locked us in. The guards hadn't returned. The other bearers, the ones across the hall, had fallen into an uneasy quiet, punctuated only by the occasional cough or shuffle. The air was thick with old stone, dried blood, and something else. Something ancient, circling like smoke on the edge of wind. Then Joshua's breath caught. He looked up slowly, his brow furrowing as if he were listening to something I could not hear. Then his gaze turned inward, distant, alert. "She's near," he murmured. "The icon of wind." I glanced at him with worry and unease, but he didn't look at me. "I feel her ether," he said, voice low and tense. "She'll know I'm here." "Then she'll come," I said, "just as we hoped." He gave a faint nod, but his expression stayed troubled, as if he wasn't entirely sure if this was fortune or folly. "This may be our first lead. The dominant of Garuda. Long has she served the king of Waloed." "Or maybe she's as lost as the rest of us," I answered. "We find what information we can and make our escape." There would be no opportunity to fight our way free, not unless the chaos came from within. But if we could shake the foundations first. Joshua nodded. "You free the bearers. I will provide the distraction." Outside the bars, the lantern flickered, the flame bowing to some unseen draft. And as the hour deepened, the tower above creaked with old weight and older secrets. Wind whispered faintly through the cracks, not strong enough to howl, but enough to stir a loose strand of hair at my cheek. As we waited in the light of the lantern, I thought again of the duty I had sworn at the age of 7, the vow etched into my very being, into every breath and each moment at his side over the years. As his shadow, as his sword, and now as his last ember of safety in a world unravelling, his attendant, his shield, a knight of the Undying. We knew we would not have to wait long.